The sun had just risen when Martha sat on her small porch with a warm cup of tea in her hand. The air was fresh, filled with the gentle sound of birds calling from the trees. She liked mornings like this. They were quiet, peaceful, and soft on her heart. Yet deep inside, she felt an emptiness that never fully left her. Life had slowed down after her husband passed away, and though she loved her grandchildren dearly, there was still something missing. At 68 years old, most people around her believed Martha's time should only be spent resting, knitting, or taking walks in the park. But Martha's heart carried a little secret, something she had dreamed about since her younger days but never had the courage or chance to try. That secret was martial arts. It wasn't about fighting or showing power. No, Martha admired the discipline, the calm focus, and the balance of body and mind. When she was a little girl, she once watched a karate demonstration at a fair. The way the students moved with such respect and strength had left her amazed. But life had pulled her in other directions. She married, raised children, cared for her home, and worked long years. Now, with her husband gone and her children grown, that dream came knocking at her heart again. The spark to follow it came one evening when Martha visited her daughter. Her young grandson, Leo, was in the living room, jumping and kicking in front of the television as he copied a karate video. His little face lit up with excitement as he shouted, "Hi-ya!" His energy filled the room with laughter, but to Martha, it stirred something much deeper. She sat quietly, watching him, when the thought slipped out of her mouth almost like a whisper, "Why not me too?" Leo turned his head, smiling. "Grandma, you can do it. You're brave." The words stayed with her long after she went home that night. She lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Maybe people would laugh. Maybe she would look silly. Maybe her body would ache. But maybe, just maybe, she could finally touch that old dream. The following week, Martha gathered her courage. She searched for the nearest karate school, her hands trembling slightly as she held the small flyer she had found pinned outside the grocery store. "Beginner classes, all ages welcome." Her heart pounded at the last three words. All ages. Could that really mean her too? On Monday evening, Martha stood at the entrance of the dojo. The building was simple but filled with bright light. Through the wide glass doors, she could see children in white uniforms running across the mats, their voices echoing with energy. She clutched her small bag tightly, her palms damp with nervous sweat. "Here we go," she whispered to herself. When she stepped inside, the sound of the room washed over her. Parents stood along the walls, chatting and smiling as they watched their children. The mat stretched wide, marked with neat lines. At the center stood the sensei, tall and calm, his black belt tied firmly around his waist. But the moment Martha entered, silence swept across part of the room. Children turned their heads, their eyes widening as they noticed her. A few leaned close to each other, whispering and giggling. One boy muttered under his breath, loud enough for his friends to hear, "Grandma's here to fight." Laughter followed. Martha's cheeks warmed. She tightened her grip on the bag strap and forced a gentle smile. She reminded herself, "I am not here for them. I am here for me." The sensei walked toward her, bowing slightly. "Welcome. You are here for class." "Yes," Martha said softly, her voice carrying both nerves and determination. "Good," the sensei replied with a polite nod. "All students are welcome. Please, change into your uniform." The uniform felt strange at first, stiff and unfamiliar. But when Martha tied the white belt around her waist, something inside her shifted. She felt both nervous and proud, like a child on the first day of school. Class began with stretches. Martha tried her best to follow along. She bent forward, but her back groaned. She lifted her arms, but her shoulders trembled. Around her, the children moved easily, their young bodies full of energy. She could hear their soft laughter again when her knee cracked loudly as she bent. Still, she pushed through. She stretched higher, bent lower, and balanced as best as she could. Next came basic punches. The sensei called out, 1, 2, 3. The students punched the air with sharp speed. Martha's punches were slower, softer. She felt awkward, her arms not as straight as she wanted. Yet each time she moved, she focused on giving her full effort. Then came kicks. Martha lifted her leg, but it barely rose above her knee. A few children tried to copy her small kick, laughing as they exaggerated her slow movement. Her heart stung, but she kept going. When the class ended, sweat ran down her face, and her body ached more than it had in years. She walked toward the door, holding her bag again. She had heard every giggle, every whisper, every joke. And yet, something surprising filled her heart: pride. She had not run away. She had not quit. That night, as Martha sat by her window sipping tea, her body aching but her spirit alive, she whispered to herself, "They can laugh. But I will keep going." It was the first step. Small, shaky, and imperfect, but it was hers. The next week, Martha returned to the dojo. Her body still felt sore from the first class, but her spirit was strong. She had promised herself that she would not give up. Still, as she opened the door and stepped inside, she felt a wave of nervousness wash over her. The children were already on the mats, laughing and talking before class began. A few parents looked up, their eyes landing on Martha. Some gave polite smiles, but others exchanged quiet glances, as if asking themselves why an elderly woman had chosen this place. Martha bowed politely at the entrance, just as she had been taught. Her steps were careful as she moved to the side of the mat, waiting for the sensei to begin. She could hear whispers again. "Why is she here?" one boy muttered to his friend. "She can't even kick," the other replied, giggling. Martha's heart tightened, but she kept her eyes straight. She reminded herself of the small garden at her home, the way flowers grew slowly yet still bloomed beautifully. "I will bloom too," she thought quietly. The sensei clapped his hands, calling for silence. "Line up," he commanded firmly. The students rushed into rows, standing straight. Martha moved to the end of the line, her posture calm though her heart was restless. The class began with stretches, just like the first time. Martha bent forward, her back stiff, but she held the position. When they leaned side to side, she moved carefully, listening to her body. Some children moved with ease, touching their toes, while Martha only reached her knees. A boy whispered loudly, "She's going to break in half if she bends more." Laughter burst from the line, but quickly quieted when the sensei gave a sharp look. Next came basic stances. The students spread their legs and bent their knees, holding their ground as the sensei walked by, correcting their posture. Martha lowered herself into the stance, her legs trembling almost instantly. Sweat gathered on her forehead as she tried to hold the position. One girl leaned close to another and whispered, "She looks like she's stuck in slow motion." Both giggled, covering their mouths. Martha's face grew warm, but she kept her stance. Her knees shook, her muscles burned, but she did not give up. When the sensei called for punches, Martha moved her arms forward, steady but slower than the rest. 1, 2, 3, the students shouted as their fists cut through the air. Martha's punches were not sharp, but they were full of effort. She gave everything she had to each movement. A boy behind her made an exaggerated slow punch, mimicking her. The children around him laughed again. Martha heard it clearly. Her heart sank, but she reminded herself of Leo, her grandson. She remembered his small voice saying, "Grandma, you're brave." That memory gave her strength. She lifted her arms again, punching forward with determination. After punches came kicks. The sensei demonstrated, lifting his leg high and snapping it forward with speed. The children followed, their legs flying up quickly. Martha raised her leg, but it stopped halfway. Her balance wavered, and she nearly stumbled. The room filled with quiet giggles. "She can't even lift her leg," a girl whispered. But this time, Martha did not feel the same sting. She had already prepared her heart. She knew she was not fast, not flexible, not strong like the children. But she also knew one thing: they would all go home and forget about this moment, while she would go home and practice. When the class ended, Martha bowed politely and stepped off the mat. Her uniform clung to her skin, damp with sweat. Her body ached worse than before, but her eyes carried a quiet glow. She had made it through another class. As she walked toward the door, she overheard two mothers talking softly. "Why is she even doing this? At her age," one asked. "Maybe she's lonely," the other replied with a shrug. Martha paused for a second, their words sinking into her heart. Then she took a deep breath and stepped outside into the cool evening air. The sky was painted with soft pink clouds, the sun slowly sinking behind the rooftops. She walked home slowly, her steps heavy but steady. That night, Martha sat by her window again, sipping warm tea. Her legs ached, her arms felt weak, but her spirit was awake. She thought about the laughter, the whispers, the mocking smiles. They hurt, but they did not defeat her. She remembered her husband's voice from years ago, telling her, "Martha, you are stronger than you know." A tear slipped down her cheek as she whispered, "I will prove it not to them, but to myself." Before going to bed, she stood in front of the mirror. She raised her arms slowly, forming the stance she had learned. She punched forward gently, practicing each move in silence. Her reflection looked back at her, not just an old woman, but a fighter, someone who refused to surrender. The laughter of the children still echoed in her ears, but her heart carried something louder: the steady beat of determination. And so, Martha decided. No matter how much they laughed, she would return again. She would practice quietly at home, and little by little, she would grow stronger. For Martha, this was not just about karate. It was about life itself. And she was not ready to stop living with courage. The following week slipped by slowly, each one carrying its own test for Martha. Every Monday and Thursday evening, she tied her white belt and stepped into the dojo. She still felt nervous each time she walked through the doors, but she no longer let that fear hold her back. She had made up her mind this dream was hers, and she would protect it. But the laughter did not stop. Some of the children still giggled whenever her leg wobbled or her arm moved slower than theirs. Sometimes their whispers floated across the mat, sharp and unkind. Even a few parents looked at her with puzzled eyes, as though she had entered the wrong place. Martha heard everything. She felt the sting of it, but she never answered back. She carried herself with quiet dignity, bowing, moving, and practicing with all her heart. At home, however, her struggle was far more difficult than anyone knew. After each class, her body ached in ways she had never experienced before. Her knees burned, her shoulders felt heavy, and her back throbbed when she lay down at night. Some mornings, it took all her strength just to rise from bed. Still, she pushed forward. She made a small routine for herself. Every morning, before breakfast, she stood in her living room in front of the mirror. She stretched her arms slowly, bent her knees into stances, and practiced the punches the sensei had taught. At first, her movements were stiff and shaky. But day by day, they grew steadier. She never told her daughter or grandchildren how hard it was. When they visited, she smiled and baked cookies, hiding the pain in her legs. She kept her secret practice private, as if it were a treasure only she could understand. One rainy evening, as she moved through her stances at home, she caught her reflection in the mirror. For a moment, she did not see just an old woman struggling to move. She saw someone standing tall, her eyes steady, her fists firm. A small smile spread across her face. "I am learning," she whispered to herself. In the dojo, the sensei began to notice her effort. Though Martha was never the fastest or the strongest, she was always the most focused. When he corrected her stance, she listened carefully, nodding with respect. When he demonstrated a new move, she practiced it again and again until she understood. The younger students often lost attention. They fidgeted, looked at the clock, or whispered to each other. But Martha never allowed herself to be distracted. She treated every lesson like a gift. One evening, during class, the sensei called the students together. "Patience is important," he said firmly. "Skill does not come in one day. It comes with time, with practice, with respect." His eyes rested on Martha for a brief moment before moving on. Some children noticed and exchanged glances. Though they still teased, a quiet seed of respect began to grow in their hearts. But Martha's road was not easy. During one class, she stumbled while practicing a side kick. She lost her balance and fell to her knee. The room filled with gasps, and then, from the back, a small laugh escaped from one of the boys. Martha's face flushed red. She wanted to cry, but instead, she pressed her hands to the mat and slowly stood again. She bowed politely, then returned to her stance. The sensei's expression grew serious as he looked at the children. "Strength," he said firmly, "is not never falling. Strength is standing back up." Those words settled in Martha's heart like a soft flame. She carried them with her, repeating them whenever she felt weak. Outside of class, life was still quiet. She spent her mornings in the garden, pulling weeds and watering flowers, her mind replaying the moves she practiced. She carried groceries home from the market slowly but steadily, her hands stronger from training. And at night, she wrote small notes in a notebook she kept by her bed. "Today I balanced longer. Today my punch was stronger. Today I fell, but I stood up again." Each note reminded her that progress was not always visible to others, but it was real. As weeks turned into months, Martha began to notice small changes. Her balance grew steadier. Her arms felt lighter when she lifted them. Even climbing the stairs in her house became easier. She still moved slower than the children, but she no longer felt as fragile. And though the whispers had not disappeared completely, they no longer pierced her heart the same way. She had learned to protect her spirit with quiet strength. One evening, after class, as she was tying her shoes, a small voice spoke beside her. It was Daniel, a shy boy who often stood at the back of the line. "My friends laugh at me too," he whispered, looking at the floor. "Because I'm small." He paused, then added softly, "But you don't stop." Martha looked at him with surprise. His eyes were wide, filled with both sadness and admiration. She bent down slightly, resting her hand on his shoulder. "We don't need to stop, Daniel," she said kindly. "We just need to keep going. That is how we become strong." The boy's face brightened a little. He nodded, then hurried off to his mother. Martha watched him go, her heart swelling with quiet pride. Maybe she was not just learning for herself anymore. Maybe, without knowing it, she was teaching others too. That night, as she walked home under the stars, Martha felt something new: hope. The laughter was still there, the struggle was still heavy, but now she knew she was not alone. Her silent journey was beginning to touch others, even in the smallest ways. And that made every step, every ache, every tear worth it. The dojo felt different when Martha stepped inside that Thursday evening. The mats were the same, the bright lights overhead glowed as usual, and the children were still chatting before class began. Yet there was something subtle in the air, something she could not quite name. As always, Martha bowed politely at the entrance before walking to the side of the mat. A few children noticed her and whispered, but their laughter was softer than before. Some of them only watched, their eyes curious rather than mocking. The sensei clapped his hands, calling the class to order. "Line up," he commanded. The students rushed into rows, their white uniforms rustling as they stood straight. Martha took her place at the end, her heart calm. The warm UPS began. They stretched their arms, bent their knees, and twisted their bodies. Martha moved carefully, feeling the strength in her legs grow with each week. Her balance was steadier now, her movements slower but more controlled. She still heard a few giggles when she couldn't stretch as far as the others, but this time, she did not feel embarrassed. She simply focused on doing her best. When the sensei called for punches, Martha tightened her fists and drove them forward. 1, 2, 3. The dojo echoed with the sound of fists cutting the air. Martha's punches were not sharp like the children's, but they carried weight and focus. One boy at the front glanced back at her. Instead of laughing, he simply stared for a moment, almost as if surprised by how firm her movements had become. Next came kicks. Martha lifted her leg. It rose higher than before, still not as high as the younger students, but higher than it had ever been. Her balance held steady, and she snapped her foot forward, completing the move without stumbling. For the first time, a few children clapped softly, almost without thinking. Martha's lips curved into a small smile. It was not applause for perfection, it was recognition that she was improving. After class, as she was collecting her bag, Daniel, the shy boy who had spoken to her before, approached again. He shifted nervously, then said, "Your kick was good today." Martha's smile grew warmer. "Thank you, Daniel. I'm practicing a lot." The boy nodded quickly, then hurried back to his mother. Watching him, Martha felt something new stirring inside her heart. Maybe her presence was beginning to mean something more than just an old woman chasing a dream. The following week, the sensei introduced partner practice. Each student was paired with someone to practice basic blocks. Martha hesitated, unsure who would want to be paired with her. Before she could worry too much, Daniel stepped forward. "I'll go with her," he said softly. The children around him stared in surprise, but Daniel stood tall beside Martha. They bowed to each other, then began practicing. Martha lifted her arm to block as Daniel punched slowly. She laughed gently, saying, "You don't need to go easy on me." Daniel smiled for the first time since she had met him. Their practice was far from perfect, but it was steady and respectful. Martha noticed that some children were watching them, their earlier laughter replaced with curiosity. That night, as Martha walked home, her steps felt lighter. The air was cool, and the stars above shone softly. She whispered to herself, "Change comes slowly, but it comes." At home, she continued her quiet routine. Every morning she stretched, punched, and kicked in front of the mirror. Sometimes she stumbled, sometimes her legs shook, but she always stood back up. She marked her progress in her notebook: kick higher today. Held stance longer. Daniel smiled. Those small notes became her strength. The biggest test came during the monthly demonstration. Parents filled the dojo, sitting along the walls to watch their children. Martha felt nervous as she tied her belt, her hands trembling slightly. She wondered if people would laugh when they saw her perform in front of everyone. The sensei called each student forward in groups. When Martha's turn came, the room grew quiet. She stepped onto the mat, bowing with respect. Her heart raced, but she focused on her breathing. She moved through the basic sequence: stances, punches, blocks, and kicks. Her body was slower than the others, but every movement was careful and strong. She did not rush. She did not stumble. When her kick rose higher than it ever had before, a few parents actually clapped. Martha bowed at the end, her chest rising with deep breaths. She expected to hear laughter, but instead, the dojo was filled with polite applause. It was not wild or loud, but it was real. For the first time, the children and parents had seen her not as someone out of place, but as a true student. After the demonstration, one mother walked up to her. "You're very brave," she said kindly. "My daughter told me she looks up to you." Martha's eyes grew wet with tears, but she held her smile. "Thank you," she whispered. That night, she sat by her window again with a cup of tea in her hand. Her body ached, but her spirit was light. She thought of the children's softer whispers, Daniel's quiet friendship, and the parents' gentle applause. The laughter had not fully disappeared, but something stronger had begun to grow in its place: respect. And Martha knew that respect was earned not by being the fastest or the strongest, but by showing up again and again, even when the world doubted you. Her journey was still long, but for the first time, she felt she was not walking it alone. The dojo was filled with excitement that Saturday morning. It was the day of the belt examination, the day every student had been preparing for over the past months. Children ran around with nervous energy, their parents watching proudly from the benches along the walls. The air felt heavy with anticipation, yet bright with hope. Martha sat quietly at the edge of the mat, tying the knot of her white belt with steady hands. Her heart beat faster than usual, but her face carried calm determination. She had been practicing for weeks, every morning in her living room, every night before bed. She knew her movements were not perfect, but she also knew she had given everything she had. Around her, the children whispered as they glanced her way. Some still found it unusual to see a grandmother preparing for the same test as they were. One boy muttered, "Do you think she'll even pass?" His friend shrugged, but their words did not shake Martha this time. She had grown used to whispers. She had learned how to rise above them. The sensei called for silence. He stood tall in front of the students, his black belt firm around his waist. "Today," he began, "you will show not only your skill, but your discipline, your respect, and your spirit. A belt is not just cloth around your waist, it is a mark of your journey." His eyes moved across the line of students, resting for a brief moment on Martha before continuing. The test began with the youngest children. They stepped forward one by one, performing their basic stances, punches, and kicks. Parents clapped, proud of their children's courage. Martha watched each of them with gentle eyes, remembering her own grandchildren. When her turn came, the room grew noticeably quieter. Some children leaned forward, curious to see what she would do. Parents watched with polite but questioning expressions. Martha stepped onto the mat, bowing deeply to the sensei, then to the audience. Her movements were respectful, filled with dignity. She took her stance. Her knees bent, her arms rose, and her focus sharpened. The sequence began. Her punches came first. They were slower than the others, but steady and precise. She kept her fists firm, her shoulders strong, each strike carrying the effort of many nights of practice. Then came her blocks. She lifted her arms carefully, moving with control. When the kicks arrived, Martha's heart raced. This had always been her hardest part. She lifted her leg higher than she ever had before and snapped it forward. The kick was not perfect, but it was clear, and she did not stumble. The dojo remained silent. For a moment, Martha feared she had failed to impress. But then she noticed the silence was not from laughter, not from doubt. It was from attention. They were watching her not with mockery, but with respect. She finished her sequence with a final bow, lowering her head gracefully. The sensei looked at her for a long moment. Then he gave a small nod, his eyes steady and serious. Applause began to rise from the benches. First soft, then louder. Parents clapped, children joined in. Even those who had once whispered about her were now clapping with real admiration. Martha felt her eyes grow wet. She quickly wiped them before standing tall again. She had not done the moves perfectly, but she had done them with heart and the dojo had seen it. After the performance, Martha returned to the line of students. Daniel, standing next to her, leaned close and whispered, "You did amazing." His smile was wide, his small face glowing with admiration. Martha smiled back, whispering, "Thank you." The rest of the test continued. Students sparred gently, showed their techniques, and demonstrated discipline. Martha watched, clapping for each one, her own heart lighter than it had been in years. Finally, the sensei called everyone forward. One by one, he handed out new belts to the students who had passed. When he reached Martha, the room seemed to hold its breath. He stood before her, holding the belt in his hands. "Martha," he said, his voice deep and clear, "you have shown more than technique today. You have shown patience, respect, and courage. For that, you have earned this." He tied the yellow belt gently around her waist. Martha bowed, tears filling her eyes. The applause grew louder, echoing across the dojo. Children cheered, parents clapped, and Daniel's voice rang out above the rest, "Go Grandma Martha." The room laughed warmly, not with mockery but with joy. Martha's heart swelled with pride. She had not only passed, she had changed how people saw her. That night, at home, she placed the yellow belt carefully on her dresser. She sat by her window, sipping tea as usual, but this time her heart felt different. She remembered the laughter, the whispers, the doubt. And she remembered how she had stood, bowed, and shown her spirit. She whispered softly to herself, "I did it." But she knew this was not the end. The belt was not the final goal, it was just another step on her journey. She was no longer the woman who doubted herself when she first entered the dojo. She was a student of karate now, respected and seen. And deep inside, she knew the road ahead would bring more challenges, but also more victories. For Martha, life had just opened a new chapter, one she had waited her whole life to begin. The dojo felt alive with energy the week after the belt test. The children came in with their new belts tied proudly, their voices buzzing with excitement. Parents smiled, congratulating one another's children, and the sensei observed it all with his calm expression. Martha stepped into the dojo wearing her yellow belt for the very first time. Her hands touched it gently as if to remind herself it was real. She still felt shy, still aware of the curious looks that followed her, but this time, she stood taller. The belt was proof of her effort, proof that she belonged. Daniel waved at her from across the mat. "Hi, Grandma Martha," he called cheerfully. A few of the children giggled at his nickname, but it was not cruel laughter anymore, it was friendly, almost affectionate. Martha smiled warmly and waved back. The class began as usual, with bows and stretches. Martha moved with focus, her body a little stronger each time. When they practiced their punches, her arms cut forward firmly, each one filled with determination. The children no longer copied her to make fun. Instead, some began sneaking glances at her, watching the way she never gave up. After warm-ups, the sensei called the students into a circle. "Today," he said, "we will talk about respect." His deep voice filled the dojo, and everyone listened quietly. Respect is not only for your sensei. It is for each other. No matter your age, size, or strength, each student deserves respect. Martha felt her heart stir. She wondered if his words were meant for her. The sensei looked around the circle, then added, "There is one student here who has shown great courage. She is not the youngest, she is not the fastest, but she has taught us all something important." His eyes rested on Martha. The children turned to her, their faces surprised. Martha blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. The sensei stepped forward. Slowly, he bowed deeply to Martha. Gasps filled the room. Children froze, parents leaned forward, and even Martha herself stood in shock. The sensei's voice was calm and steady as he spoke again. Respect is not given for speed or strength alone. It is given for spirit. Martha has shown us what true spirit means. For a moment, Martha could not move. Her eyes filled with tears as she looked at the man who had taught her so much. The leader of the dojo, the one all students looked up to, was bowing to her. The children slowly followed their sensei's example. One by one, they bowed in her direction. The sound of their uniforms rustling filled the dojo. Parents in the back clapped softly, their faces warm with admiration. Martha pressed her hands together, bowed back deeply, and whispered, "Thank you." Her voice trembled, but it carried all the gratitude in her heart. The moment passed, but its meaning lingered. From that day forward, the way others saw Martha changed completely. She was no longer just the old lady in karate class. She was Martha, the student who carried courage in her heart. During practice, children began treating her differently. When she stumbled, no one laughed. Instead, someone would quickly help her up. When she landed a steady kick or punch, a few students would nod with respect. Even parents began greeting her kindly after class, asking how long she had been training. Daniel especially grew close to her. He often stood near her during practice, copying her careful focus. "You don't give up," he said one evening. "That makes me not want to give up either." Martha smiled. "That's the secret, Daniel. We keep going, no matter what." At home, Martha carried the memory of the bow in her heart like a treasure. Each time her body ached, she remembered that moment of respect. It gave her strength to continue, to keep practicing, to keep showing up. She wrote in her notebook that night, "Sensei bowed to me. I will never forget this." The bow was more than just a gesture. It was a reminder that her journey mattered, that her efforts had touched others. It reminded her that courage could shine at any age. In the following weeks, Martha noticed something remarkable. The dojo atmosphere grew warmer. The children no longer whispered cruelly about anyone, not even the shy boy Daniel. Instead, they began encouraging each other, just as they had encouraged her. One evening, as Martha left the dojo, a mother stopped her at the door. "You inspire us," she said kindly. "My daughter told me she wants to be strong like you." Martha's eyes softened with tears, but she smiled. "Tell her she already is," she replied. That night, she sat by her window again with her cup of tea, the stars twinkling above. She thought about how far she had come since her first nervous day, when whispers and laughter filled the room. Now, there was respect. Now, there was admiration. She whispered into the quiet night, "This is not just my journey. It belongs to all of us now." And as the wind carried her words away, Martha knew the path ahead was still long, but no longer lonely. She had earned her place, not just on the mat, but in the hearts of those around her. The dojo seemed brighter in the weeks that followed the bell. Martha walked through the sliding doors with a confidence she had never felt before. Children no longer stared at her as though she did not belong. Instead, they greeted her warmly. Some bowed politely, others waved, and Daniel always ran up to her with his wide grin. Each lesson became more than just punches and kicks. For Martha, every class was a chance to prove that age could not stop courage. For the children, every class was a chance to learn that respect was not tied to strength or speed, but to the spirit inside each person. One evening, the sensei announced something new. "In 2 months, we will hold a demonstration at the community center," he said. "It will be a chance for our students to show what they have learned. Families, friends, and neighbors will be invited." The dojo buzzed with excitement. Children whispered eagerly about showing their moves, parents clapped with pride, and Daniel's eyes sparkled. But Martha felt her heart sink for a moment. A public demonstration? She imagined a large crowd, hundreds of eyes watching her. Doubt crept into her chest. That night at home, she sat quietly at her kitchen table. The memory of the sensei's bow filled her heart, but fear whispered louder. What if I forget the moves? What if I fall? What if I look foolish in front of everyone? Her hand rested on the notebook where she had written all her thoughts since her first day. She turned the pages until she found the words, "Keep going, no matter what." She closed her eyes and whispered, "Yes. I will do it. Not for me, but for everyone who once felt they didn't belong." The weeks passed quickly. The dojo grew busier as the demonstration neared. Children practiced harder than ever, parents stayed longer to watch, and even Martha began staying late after class. Daniel often stayed with her, and together they repeated the basic moves again and again. One evening, when Martha grew tired, Daniel patted her hand. "Don't stop now, Grandma Martha," he said with a grin. "You always tell me not to give up." Martha laughed softly. "You are right, Daniel. We will not stop." The sensei watched them from across the mat, his eyes full of pride. He knew the demonstration would be special, not because of the strongest or the fastest student, but because of the courage of one woman who refused to be defeated by age or fear. The night of the demonstration arrived. The community center was filled with people. Families sat in rows, neighbors chatted, and a soft hum of excitement filled the room. Children in crisp uniforms lined up nervously, their belts tied neatly. Martha stood at the end of the line, her heart pounding. She wore her uniform and her yellow belt with quiet pride, but her hands trembled slightly. She looked around the room and saw so many faces, some curious, some expectant. Then she spotted Daniel waving at her from the same line. His small smile steadied her heart. She reminded herself, this is not about fear. This is about showing what courage looks like. The demonstration began. The students performed their warm ups in unison, the sound of their movements echoing through the hall. Punches cut through the air, kicks snapped sharply, and the crowd applauded with admiration. When Martha's turn came, the hall grew quiet. She stepped forward slowly, bowing deeply to the audience, then to the sensei. Her body felt heavy with nerves, but her spirit was light with determination. She began her routine: simple punches, strong blocks, steady kicks. Each movement was deliberate, full of the effort she had put in over months. She moved slower than the children, but there was a strength in her rhythm, a quiet dignity that drew the eyes of the audience. Halfway through, she stumbled slightly. A few gasps rose from the crowd, but Martha straightened her back and continued without pause. That single moment of recovery earned louder applause than any perfect kick. By the time she finished, the hall was filled with clapping. Some stood, others cheered, and Martha bowed again, her heart overflowing with gratitude. The sensei stepped forward, lifted her hand, and said to the audience, "This is Martha. She is proof that spirit has no age. She is our example." Tears glistened in Martha's eyes as the crowd erupted with applause once more. Parents nodded with respect, children clapped with wide smiles, and Daniel cheered the loudest. That night, as Martha walked home under the stars, she felt lighter than ever. She thought about her first day in the dojo, when laughter followed her steps. She remembered the whispers, the doubt, the loneliness. And then she thought about the bow, the respect, the applause, and the love that now filled her life. She paused under a lamppost, looked up at the sky, and whispered, "Thank you." From that day forward, Martha became more than just a student in the dojo. She became a symbol. Children who were shy found courage because of her. Adults who thought it was too late to start something new looked at her and believed again. Parents pointed to her and told their children, "See? That is what strength looks like." Her journey had begun with ridicule, but it ended with legacy. And whenever Martha tied her belt, she smiled softly, whispering to herself, "This is not the end. It is only the beginning.